Hi there, class. So, chapter 9 and my thoughts on it. I believe this chapter was pretty clear. It lists out programs, strategies for preventing gang related activity. Um, I actually enjoyed this chapter. It was just pretty relevant material um, because it lays out how relevant it is that youths are at risk for gang activity between the ages of 12 and 15, and how pretty much lower socioeconomic backgrounds is what causes it. Um, and the lack of social services in poor communities is what is the root of gang issues. So, how realistic Chapter 9 is. The reality of Chapter 9 is that at one point of the chapter, it mentions how our country has identified the problem but has done little to help. It seems that a lot of the efforts to prevent gang activity is from the communities themselves. So, as far as that, the helpfulness of this chapter is that it explains programs and efforts in detail. Like Homeboy Industries, it provides services for youths who have been previously involved with gangs, giving counseling, education, legal services. Also, like the DARE program, how I taught children, and I grew up going to the DARE program when I was in elementary school, and it teaches them how to avoid gangs and violence and drugs. I feel like it was really helpful to refresh on these programs and be aware of all these programs and any type of you know law enforcement strategies, suppression strategies. It's all handy to have an idea of how the community approaches these issues. Also, how does it compare to our ideas that we had shared prior? I think a big part of our ideas were approaching gang activity in a preventative measure through programs, but also I think that it really touches up on law enforcement, and we had brought up law enforcement towards gangs being stricter. So it really touches on the tactics that law enforcement does to try to avoid gang activity. Pretty much like how they use hotspot targeting, community policing, they enforce a juvenile curfew. So they implement all these efforts so that juveniles have a more positive way of, you know, being outside of school. They're doing more positive things instead of being involved with delinquent behavior, and how the community does an effort to prevent them from being delinquent. So I think overall, chapter 9 was a really handy chapter, and thank you for listening to my post.